Hi everyone, I am Surabhi and I run Luchi and Mutton's Dog Behavior and Nutrition. I am based out of Gurgaon in India and I offer private nutrition and behavior consultations for pet parents and dog caregivers. I work with a holistic approach using science and empathy as key pillars in supporting dogs. Welcome to another episode of the Luchi and Muttons podcast. This is perhaps going to be a controversial one because today I'm talking about the impact of high intensity exercises on dog health, behavior, and overall well being. As always, please share what stood out for you in the episode with me. You can connect with me via email or Instagram and Facebook, details of which will be in the episode description below. This is a heavy episode, so stay with me till the end, and hopefully, you will walk away with lots of insights and thinking points. Like always, I will be sharing the research studies that I refer to in the episode description, so do check them out as well. For the purpose of this conversation, when I refer to high intensity exercises, I will be talking about runs, use of treadmills, brisk or excessive fast paced walks, and the ever so popular a game of fetch. And I'm going to talk about this from several different angles. So let's get right to it. I wanted to zoom out and start by sharing an ethological perspective. So here goes. An activity budget done by researchers on free living dogs found that free living dogs spent close to 52% of their time in an inactive state, which means that they were in a state of inactivity for close to 12 to 13 hours a day. Running was a very, very tiny part of their activities and was done only when needed. So here the behavior was functional because it was serving a very specific purpose. Think chasing bikes or chasing other dogs from a specific territory. They very rarely engaged in high intensity exercises themselves. This is significant because it's telling us how dogs, when given choice and agency, would choose to spend their time. And this begs us to consider that this popular routine of getting our dogs to engage in high intensity activities is essentially man made. We have inserted this routine into our dog's lifestyle as opposed to them opting into it or them actually expressing a need for this. One of the mistakes that we continue to make is that when we see our dogs worked up, we engage them further in hyper frenzied activities instead of engaging them in activities that can help them slow down and calm down. And I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes as to why that's important. But this also brings me to my next angle, so as to speak. Let's now look at the physiology of what happens in the body when dogs are put through high intensity exercises. In a study done on greyhounds before and after high intensity exercises, this was the conclusion, and I quote directly from the paper. The abrupt increase in parameters like heart rate, blood lactate, and rectal temperature values observed immediately after the exercise indicates the high intensity of the effort performed. Heart rate, blood lactate, and rectal temperature are reliable physiological parameters to accurately assess the physiological response of dogs to effort. Based on the results obtained in this study, a more extensive recovery phase would be necessary for a total return of the assessed parameters to resting values, particularly BL concentration and RT. This means that dogs, after engaging in high intensity exercises, require an extensive recovery phase. What is extensive, however, is defined for each dog differently because every dog's threshold is different. But what is clear is the need for recovery and not for repetitive, high intensity exercises without adequate rest. The idea of rest is also something that I have often seen missing in some of the lifestyles that I see today, both for human beings and dogs. I see pet parents engaging their dogs in high intensity exercises a couple of times a day, every day in the week, without enough opportunity to rest. But also, some of these dogs struggle to rest because of a physiological reason, which I'll come to in just a bit. In other studies done on the use of treadmills for dogs, which again seems to be a really popular suggestion to burn energy, this was the finding. The rectal temperature values increased during the experiment because, as often happens during exercise, the heat produced exceeds the ability of the dog to dissipate it, causing the body temperature to increase. During the trial, the dog's heart rates also significantly increased. And as heart rate is the main determinant of cardiac output and oxygen uptake, its increase during treadmill exercise is an index of cardiovascular workload in untrained dogs. Treadmill running is also associated in the potentially negative adaptations of several neuroendocrine parameters. Such alterations in neuroendocrine tissues and immune responses are commonly associated with chronic stress. Researchers employing forced activity need to be aware that this type of exercise procedure also produces physiological adaptations indicative of chronic stress, and that these changes could potentially impact other measures of interest. In another study done on dogs who performed prolonged exercises till the point of exhaustion, the results suggest that hyperthermia, which is overheating, developing during prolonged muscular work, exerts an adverse effect on muscle metabolism that may be relevant to limitation of endurance. So, across the board, we're seeing elevated parameters pointing towards a state of stress, and in some cases, even chronic stress for dogs that engage in high intensity exercises, irrespective of what the exercise is. And so, when we're saying that the body is in a state of stress, we are physiologically saying that the body is in a fight or flight mode. We also know that when the body does go into a fight or flight mode, there is a flash flood of hormones, specifically adrenaline and cortisol. This is needed as a natural response to any perceived threat and is an evolutionary response. However, the problem with cortisol is that it rushes in really fast but takes very, very long to leave the body. In fact, in one study, thunderphobic dogs were exposed to thunderstorms, and they found that along with fearful behaviors like whining and pacing, the cortisol levels in these dogs increased by 207%, and these levels did not return to baseline within 40 minutes. Some studies have also shown that cortisol levels don't reach baseline for weeks after exposure, which means that for however long, the body continues to be in a state of stress. Now, imagine putting the dog's body through repetitive fight or flight activating situations. Think of how much cortisol is rushing in and how much continues to stay in the system long after the stress inducing situation has passed. And then think about the repercussions that are not only on the dog's emotional or behavioral health, but also their physical health. We know that when dogs are in a state of stress, very similar to human beings, they are more likely to engage in reactive responses, they are less likely to rest, they are less likely to settle down, they are more likely to be at risk for multiple diseases. Another argument that I hear in favor of high intensity exercises is the argument on breed. I know of folks who recommend 2-3 hours of high intensity exercises for dogs like pit bulls because they are quote unquote very high energy dogs. Mutton, who's my pit bull, would strongly oppose this statement. I've also heard this argument for Labradors and Golden Retrievers who are expected to retrieve because that's the breed specific trait. But who said retrieving has to be done in this high intensity way that subjects our dogs to repetitive stress and repetitive movements that could potentially damage both their physical and behavioral health? In fact, when I look at the definition of retrieving, it is to get or bring back something from somewhere. It does not say to get or bring back something at a high speed, at the quickest time, by chasing, or by repetitive movements. And now, the reason why I have mentioned repetitive movements a couple of times is because those are not natural movements, those are forced movements. When given a choice, dogs are less likely to engage in repetitive movements. Through Bhag's education here in India, which is run by the incredible Sindoor Pangal, who is also my mentor, I recently interacted with Julia Robertson. She leads Garland Myotherapy in the UK and works with massage therapies for dogs with both muscular as well as skeletal conditions. I have leveraged her support for both Lucci and Mutton, who struggle with spondylosis and hip dysplasia, respectively. And it's just been such a game changer for all of us. But I was actually talking to her about pit bulls and this notion that pit bulls need all of this kind of intense exercise that spans anywhere between 2 to 3 hours every day. And I think the conversation was really meaningful because it brought another angle into this dialogue, and that's the conversation on musculature for these dogs. And when I speak of pit bulls very specifically, you'll find that a lot of pit bull type dogs are short legged, are stocky. Some of them are bred to look more compact. Some of them are born with a predisposition to hip or joint or muscular issues, and based on their body structure alone, they may not necessarily be made or can withstand repetitive high intensity exercises. And I have found this true for so many other dogs. Dogs who start showing signs of pain and discomfort and eventually get diagnosed with a hip or a joint condition as early as 4 months, as early as 6 months. And so it should really make us pause and think about the impact of these exercises on our dog's movement, their muscles, their joints, their bones, and how likely these exercises are to trigger and put them in a state of chronic pain or discomfort, a lot of which often goes unnoticed and isn't recognized till the very, very last stages of pain when the dog really struggles to move and their day to day quality of life is severely impacted. There's also some lovely work done by the Pulse Project to understand the impact of various movements and activities on the pulse or heart rate of dogs. So these dogs are hooked up with a pulse monitor, and you can see their pulse going up and down in real time as they engage in a couple of exercises. And one of these exercises was to see the impact of fetch. So the data showed a 45% increase in pulse rate. And with each repetition, the pulse only kept going up. On the contrary, when the same dog engaged in nose work, the dog's pulse experienced a 37% decrease. What that means is that the body was actually slowing down, returning to a state of calmness, and calmness has significant benefits for our dogs, including reduced incidence of quote unquote problem behaviors. So, is the point of all of this to tell you to stop high intensity exercises with your dogs? Not sure if it's that simple. I think the point really is to become aware of the impact of these on your dog and see your dog's overall well being in light of this awareness. And I resonate with this a lot because of my own personal journey with Lucci. When we got her home in 2018, I pretty much followed conventional advice on how I was expected to engage her. And that meant essentially keeping her on all the time. And so my husband would, do 45-minute runs with her twice a day, really get her to that point when she's completely exhausted, but we struggled a lot with a lot of other things. So she was really hyper. She would have continuous zoomies, and she would zoom around in the house on these really slippery floors. She'd end up splaying and splooting and hurting herself, like banging into objects around the house. She struggled with chronic gut issues. I think that was around the time when some of her discomfort really got exacerbated. Um, And she was just not a calm dog. I found her to be quite reckless. I found her to not really think and evaluate situations before her, not be able to exercise judgment quite effectively. And when I started on this journey of learning about canine behavior and coming to understand the importance of a calm dog, we made significant changes to the lifestyle that we were sharing with Lucci. And a big part of that lifestyle change was cutting out activities like fetch, cutting out high intensity activities like the runs that we used to do. And within a few weeks and months of consistently practicing that with a few other changes, I found that Lucci grew into a very different dog. She was just so much more calmer. She was able to exercise judgment more effectively. I could see her think in certain kinds of situations, something that she would never have done previously. I could see that she was able to sleep much better. I was able to see that she was able to digest her food much better, and that showed in the way that she was, putting on weight in a very systematic and healthy manner. Her gut issues resolved significantly, some of her skin issues resolved significantly. She seemed to be like a more well adjusted dog. um, and all of this happened because of this very transparent, objective assessment of the impact of some of the things that we were doing unknowingly and unintentionally. Um, and that was a game changer. So I have that personal story to back up all of what I'm saying here as well. And so I think at the end of the day, this is really about doing what is right for and by our dogs. And for a lot of them, especially in my case with Lucci, that could involve eliminating these exercises altogether and replacing them with activities that are focused on calming them down, on building emotional regulation, which is such an important skill for both our dogs as well as for ourselves. um, and to strengthen these senses of interoception, strengthen the sense of proprioception, and getting our dogs to a place where they can think about whether or not they want to engage in these activities, giving them the foundation to exercise choice, to exercise agency, and for finding more helpful ways to meet their needs. Whew, that was a lot. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end of this episode. Do let me know what stood out for you in our conversation today. If you'd like to chat about your dog or reach out for a consultation, do connect on email or social media, details of which are in the episode description below. Till then, lots of love to your dogs and you from Lucci, Mutton, and I. And I will see you in the next episode very, very soon.